In life, there are many discussions that we would rather wait to have. Discussions about end-of-life issues are often among them.
So when we're in the thick of a crisis, then there's a difficulty. We may not have a good understanding of what the choices are and what the expectations ought to be about what's going to happen and how it might turn out.
For many, these are difficult conversations.
Would you rather make those decisions ahead of time about what types of support you would want and not want? Or do you want those decisions to get placed because you have chosen not to decide in the hands of others who may not know you as well?
For everyone, they are necessary conversations.
It makes life so much more meaningful and will make your family much more comfortable if things happen, that they have some sense of direction of what you want.
We don't talk about death, but then we quietly plan for it.
Part of living fully is kind of taking care of what will happen when we die.
Join us for an in-depth look at end-of-life issues, both today and throughout Minnesota's history.
End-of-Life Choices Through History is a co-production of the Twin Cities Medical Society, providing physician leadership for the health of our communities, and TPT's Minnesota Channel. Funding has been provided by these foundations and companies.
For over 3 decades, Dr. David Bonham has specialized in pulmonary critical care. His practice has brought him into regular contact with end-of-life issues.
In general, we in our society have an expectation that our lives will be healthy and will be long, and that there are treatments available to us if there is some problem. And our expectation in general is that there's something there that should fix our problem, whatever it is. It may or may not actually be the case, and so that's where we run into anxiety, frustrations, disappointment, grief. The best circumstance that we hope for is where the patient is able to be in charge of the conversation. But if the patient is unable to participate, then it falls on the rest of us to try and understand what their desires are. And then we wrestle with this problem. It's not an easy one in many cases. There's no black and whites in many cases. It's a lot of grays. So our job is to try and navigate that as best we can.
There is always a first time for conversations about end-of-life issues. Sometimes they occur during a crisis. At other times, they occur as part of a broader discussion about one's life journey.
Gary was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, early onset, and yet he was young enough and extremely healthy that we thought he would live with it for many years. So it was quite a surprise when just one evening he suddenly became very ill. The next day, hospice brought a hospital bed over and we placed it in front of our picture window. He was there for just 10 days then before he died. We didn't have to make many decisions quickly regarding his death care because our talking about death was just part of our talking about life. Gary really valued simplicity. He was perhaps the most non-materialistic person that I have met. And I feel that that value of his we carried over into the decisions we made for his care while he was dying and his after-death care.
Reflecting on the end of life can be facilitated in many different ways. For instance, faith traditions can provide one point of entry into these important conversations. The Adath Yeshurun Synagogue has a long history in the Twin Cities area. Adath's leadership has been involved in moderating end-of-life discussions on an ongoing basis, as part of the broader set of religious traditions that its members share.
The rituals that we associate with death are very powerful rituals, I think, and help us demystify death and give us concrete things to do to start the healing process after a grievous loss.
Talking to people about how do we live our life and how do we prepare for the fact that something could always happen, and how do we really anticipate that and make choices that enable us to make sure that our values are reflected in both the burial and in how things are handled at the end of life. When I've had the conversation, there are usually three elements that I will want to raise. One is the issue of financial will, have people taking care of the arrangements so that things are in order. The second thing, which is extremely important, is that they have a living will or a medical directive to indicate if they're not able to communicate what they want in terms of treatment as they're getting towards end of life, that their family or someone who cares about them, that they will entrust those decisions to them and have communicated what they want. And the third is a custom which I believe is unique originally to Judaism, and that's called an ethical will, or tzvaot. When a person is facing the end of life, they need to have a sense of peace. They need to have a sense of peace that can come from knowing that they lived a worthwhile life, that they made a difference in the world, that if there's unfinished business, family conflict, some hurt that they feel like they could still repair, that they do that work. And that's part of what can contribute to what in the hospice world is called a good death, which is kind of an oxymoron, a good death, but in a sense that one is at peace at the end of life.
What I believe is that people need to think for themselves about how they want decisions to be made about end of life for themselves and who they trust to make those decisions. I think it helps people to plan with intentionality, even when they are afraid of tackling some of the specific issues or tackling the larger fear of death. Sometimes if you start with the questions that are not as fearful, that are not as scary, it allows you then to work on some of the harder questions.
The conscious dying and kind of making advanced directives and thinking ahead and making an ethical will and the care for the body and bereavement are all one process. It's all a part of life.
As medical practices have improved over time, individual life expectancies have generally risen. Up until several decades ago, infectious diseases took the lives of many Americans at an early age. Changes in hygiene and antibiotic use, as well as improvements in public health, have reduced childhood mortality, pushing the average age of death until a later point in life. Changes in technology have also allowed medical practitioners to intervene to prevent formerly life-ending conditions. From basic technologies such as the introduction of feeding tubes to advanced procedures such as open-heart surgery and organ transplants, life expectancy has been greatly enhanced by medical innovation.
Oh, there's no question there's been a lot of major developments. One of them was the development of antibiotics to treat infection. I think it was terribly important. My own father died of double pneumonia. He would have never died had antibiotics been available. And so that's one of the things I think that's extended life. In addition, techniques in cardiac surgery with bypasses, surgery on various organs, including the heart and other organs in the body. All of these things have played a role in extending life. And I've been fortunate enough to be on the ground floor with many of them.
Improvements to medical technology have also changed social expectations about what the end of life means and have raised some complex questions.
We are seeing patients who, thinking back on it, are much more sick and complexly ill than I think in the previous years and decades. Increasingly, what we see is patients who have not just one serious problem, but a whole handful of them. And so when these get added up, then the chance of a good recovery goes down and the complexity of caring for them goes up.
We have raised the complexity of death in many ways by having artificial means. We can keep a person alive or looking like they're alive for a long period of time. I think the things that have come along are the techniques of artificial heart. We obviously can take over the breathing mechanism so that we can artificially keep a person alive forever. It's extended till somebody says, wait, I don't think he'd want to go on like this. I mean, I think it's something that you have to face, but you have to be stimulated by a recent event of some sort. Somebody just died. The pastor of the church that I go to just died. And I'm sure a lot of people have talked about what their own thoughts were regarding when they get to the end of life. What do I want to have done? Which of these wonderful mechanisms of medicine, miracles of medicine, do I want to have imposed on me?
For much of Minnesota's history, people did not have the ability to prolong life through medical intervention. When serious illness befell them, death often came swiftly. Before recent decades, many end-of-life discussions focused on non-medical issues, such as funeral and burial preparations. Until recent years, Minnesota has been home to two primary burial traditions, those of its native peoples and those of its European settlers. Each has made contributions to our collective culture. Throughout Minnesota, one can see commemorative markers of all kinds, including aging grave sites and Native American burial sites, such as these burial mounds above downtown St. Paul. The prominent place that burial rituals play in many cultures demonstrates the fundamental importance of addressing end-of-life matters.
I'm Ojibwe, and so mine would be the Made way of being buried. It's quite a ceremony that takes place. One of the things that happen is that a body should be whole when it leaves this earth, and because certainly our belief is that we go to another land where we meet the rest of our relatives. And so it's not really looking at it as you're leaving this earth, but you're going to another part. My son died here probably about 4 or 5 years now. He wanted to have a Made ceremony and be buried that way, and he wrote out what he wanted. So that was all taken care of. It was all went according to what he wanted. And he's buried up at the Red Lake Reservation. We talked about being frightened, you know. I said, are you frightened, Steve? Are you scared? And he would say, I am. But then he said, I know that I'm going to be in a better place. And I said, yes, you are.
I'm pretty sure it is, but that'll be done by...
Both tradition and innovation inform contemporary choices about end-of-life matters. Intentional planning around medical care issues can lead to the creation of related plans that cover legacy issues and funeral arrangements. In the Twin Cities, one group is working to educate the public about the broad set of options available for end-of-life planning, including home-based funerals steeped in the traditions of the past.
There are many ways to define a home funeral, of course, but one way that I think of is that a home funeral is a family and community-centered response to a death, a way that is non-invasive, so no embalming, nothing happening that would be invasive to the body, and can incorporate whatever sacred or cultural traditions that that family holds dear, and that involves everyone from the oldest person to children in the process, in whatever way each family member chooses. And also there's something very reassuring, I think, about how natural the process of a home funeral is and how much it normalizes death.
100 years ago, everyone did this. And so it's like, it's really a part of the human experience. And so we're just really trying to, it's like natural birthing. We're kind of coming back to where things used to be.
Home-based funerals were commonplace until several decades ago, and now represent one among many burial options. Many advocates of intentional planning urge people to consider the full range of choices available to them, medical and otherwise, from an early age.
So there isn't a right or a wrong way. It's more that there are many ways. And that's sometimes scary for people. But I think it's also the way that we all start to take more responsibility for not only our living, but our dying.
Never entirely static, a culture's end-of-life traditions are impacted by a variety of factors over time. Minnesota's Hmong community has deep-seated end-of-life traditions and beliefs. As Hmong families have settled in the state over the last 4 decades, some changes have occurred, while many other traditions have been maintained. On St. Paul's East Side, a group of Hmong elders gathers inside the Jaylokashia Elder Center for lunch and a social hour. Among the elders gathered here are shamans who facilitate traditional funerals. Hmong funeral traditions are closely tied to the clan structure and to one specific birthplace. In Hmong culture, when a child is born, their placenta is buried near the main post of the house. After death, that person's spirit needs to return to take their placenta so that they can enter the afterlife.
That big post represents the main post in the house. And that's when we do our ceremony of sending his spirit back. And so it represents that this is the post, this is where your placenta is, you need to pick it up so you can go.
Ku Vang owns Legacy Funeral Home on St. Paul's West Side, which serves a predominantly Hmong clientele.
You know, Hmong funerals it is truly an end-of-life event. Our funerals are long because we have spiritual obligations that we have to meet. We believe that what happens in this lifetime dictates what happens in future lifetime. So we have to give our elders a good, proper funeral because that will give them a good opportunity in the future lifetime. This is a very traditional Hmong pattern.
Legacy Funeral Home provides a measure of how end-of-life traditions have changed as the faith composition of the Hmong community has slowly changed.
We have an East and a West chapel. And through usage, our East chapel has kind of migrated towards more of our Christian families. We've seen Lutherans and Catholics where we still see a glimpse of the cultural piece. So we don't have that sending of the spirit back, but we still have guests in which arrives, honored guests in which arrives, and we still receive them, and we still notify them at the time of death that says, your brother-in-law has passed away, or your uncle has passed away, you need to come and pay your respect.
Some customs regarding discussions about the end of life have also started to change. This can be seen in the realm of funeral planning, for instance.
Pre-arrangement is something that the Hmong community has never done. It's relatively new, okay? Because we typically don't talk about death until it happens. We've kind of moved away from that a little bit. We've actually started talking about, can we look at some pre-arrangement? Can we prepare for it? That's something that I think has to happen, and it will happen more gradually.
Confronting the end of one's life has led some to try to express their values beyond their time on Earth. One way that individuals have chosen to deal with the impermanence of their own lives is to leave legacies to future generations. Sometimes these legacies take physical form. Central Presbyterian Church in downtown St. Paul is full of commemorative pews, rooms, and details dedicated by generations of members. At other times, a legacy gets transmitted through a funeral service.
One of the most powerful funeral experiences I've conducted here at Central Presbyterian Church was for a young man, relatively young, a father of 2 teenagers. He was Cameroonian. He had come to the United States, come to Minnesota for college, had met his wife at college, and they created a home here in Minnesota.
He was very family-oriented. I really liked that about him. He believed in education. He's very pushful, hardworking, very, very good father, good husband. So that was he had a lot of good qualities in him.
Stephen's funeral was a blend of Cameroonian and American cultures and served to pass his values and beliefs on to his young daughters.
It was a wonderful blend of very Presbyterian, very Minnesota Presbyterian things. Some of the hymns we sung are sung often at funerals, but we also had a group of African musicians who sang in worship as well. People spoke at the funeral about his living in 2 different worlds, his living as a Minnesotan with children born here in the United States, and his deep existing connections to support other Cameroonian immigrants here in Minnesota and his work with that Cameroonian community here in Minnesota.
I had a lot of family support in the community, the Cameroonians, because my husband was such a well-known person, and he was the type of person that would be there for people. So people knew him in the community. It was sad, but it was nice that people could come together and be there for us.
In some ways, the service helped integrate all those different aspects of his life, even as we trusted that life continued beyond his death.
Central Church has recently held end-of-life planning discussions for its members, during which a wide variety of end-of-life topics have been covered, from legacy issues to medical wishes.
Well, last summer I was part of putting together a class, a 3-part class on end-of-life decisions and preparing for end-of-life. The first session was on planning your own funeral. The second session was on estate planning and wills. And we really wanted to get people, even young people, to think about that and write their wills. And then the third session, we brought in a chaplain talking about end-of-life medical decisions and these tough decisions for families to make, and how it's so helpful if a person has written that down ahead of time, what they would want. But just in general, encouraged people to make their plans. And one thing I know is after I did that, I made my own plan and put it on file here at church. And it does feel good to know that that is planned.
In general, I think that people wonder what's going to happen at the end of life. It's so important, and it's something that I wish people would discuss.
Having these conversations is important for anyone over 18 years of age. And I think the other point that's really important is it's an ongoing conversation. We encourage individuals to have this with loved ones every few years. Sometimes when you go from your 30s to your 40s or your 40s to your 50s. So we really encourage this as an ongoing conversation so that it's really clear for family members what your values are.
The more information one can give to their family, you have to really trust the people you've got involved in this and explain it as best you can what set of values will guide you.
People tend to die as they lived. I would like to be as intentional as possible, minute to minute in my life, and I would like to carry that through to the last minutes of my life and beyond.
Learn more at honoringchoices.org.
End of Life Choices Through History is a co-production of the Twin Cities Medical Society, providing physician leadership for the health of our communities, and TPT's Minnesota channel. Funding has been provided by these foundations and companies.